Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
U novom izdanju emisije Recite Al Jazeeri razgovaramo sa Laurom Stefan, vodećom eksperticom za borbu protiv korupcije i pravosudnu reformu u Rumuniji. Laura Stefan, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel. Now, let me start by asking you, can you provide for our viewers a comprehensive overview of the significant contributions made by the expert forum in advancing transparency and accountability within its mandate?
So we at Expert Forum are a think tank set up in 2011 in Romania. We work in Romania, but also in the region. We have lots of projects in the Western Balkans, but also in countries like Moldova and Ukraine. We put everything we do under the big umbrella of good governance. So whether we talk about energy policies or elections and election monitoring, political party funding, or reform of the judiciary, everything goes under the same key element of good governance and transparency. We believe in creating equal playing field for everybody. And also, speaking about our regional work, we also believe in the power of the region. We think that no country in Central and Eastern Europe can find a path for development without having its region along. And that's why I truly believe that a regional approach to good governance and transparency is what would make things look better in the next decade.
Right. Now, as the former chairperson of the Regional Anti-Corruption Initiative, what were some of the most challenging hurdles you encountered while spearheading the fight against corruption on a regional scale?
So one of the hurdles that we had to overcome during my mandate was, of course, something that the entire world has faced, which was the COVID crisis. I think it forced us to think of new ways to engage with member states. And I think we showed that we are a flexible organization that can adapt to current challenges. Also, I think what we managed to do during my mandate was to become more prominent with our common voice. I think the Regional Anti-Corruption Initiative has a definitive advantage in bringing countries together and offering them a fora to challenge ideas, to see openly what worked and what didn't in a respective area of policy. I think as opposed to other organizations, we're not doing monitoring, we're not doing assessment. We are a place where countries come together to discuss and plan ahead how to engage with other processes and how to better shape their policies. And I think that was, to me, the biggest advantage that the Regional Anti-Corruption Initiative had and still has. I think the profile of the organization is growing. I think we have had interest expressed also by EU member states and by non-EU member states to come closer to this initiative. We also have promoted the first time ever a treaty for exchange of data for administrative purposes in terms of controlling declarations of assets. It seems like a detail, but if you really work with practitioners, you find out that the biggest challenge that they encounter in their day-to-day activity is to reach out for information in other jurisdictions. I give this example because I think this is what RAI does. RAI talks with practitioners, and then from the practitioners, it leverages key ideas that then become the fruit of our cooperation at international level. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about an international treaty signed by countries, the last one to sign being the Republic of Moldova.
Right. Now, with your role as an international anti-corruption expert, could you elaborate on the tangible impact your endeavors have had in combating corruption in Romania, particularly, and the role you played in reforming laws aimed at tackling corruption?
So I can speak for hours, of course, about my personal experiences. Suffice to say that I've been in various positions. So I was working for the Romanian Ministry of Justice during the pre-accession period, 2005 to 2007, and I think there I had the unique chance of being in the middle of the reforms when reforms happened, when the reforms were possible. We have set up the Anti-Corruption Preventive Agency, the National Integrity Agency. We have designed declarations of assets and interests that are submitted by public officials in Romania, which are very comprehensive. And we have created a control mechanism at a time when these control mechanisms were still in a very embryonic form, let's say, in many countries. Then we had the power to reform the Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office, which later became a model in the region of one way of approaching fight against high-level corruption. Then I moved to the civil society. And I think what I learned in this movement, and from the perspective of a civil society activist, is that nothing is gained forever in the area of rule of law and anti-corruption. Generation after generation after generation, we need to talk about similar issues, and we need to reinforce what was gained in previous decades and in previous years. Freedom of Information Acts, for example, are taken for granted these days. Every country has one. And of course, people have access to public information. But that was not the reality 20 years ago. You would only find in a couple of countries laws that allow citizens to access governmental information. And then it's a question of practice, how much allegiance is it, how much compliance there is from the public sector to this provision. Then declarations of assets and interests, again, a very good example. 20 years ago, the thought of having such statements was considered, a pioneer thought, a very courageous thought at the time. Then having control mechanisms that would tackle what is being declared by public officials, again, was a dream of the future. And now most of our countries have such mechanisms. And now, speaking about RAI and speaking about the treaty, how do we come together at international level to make this work actually bear fruits? Because as we know, money don't know borders, and corrupt officials invest everywhere, so you can't really say that you're controlling the wealth of public officials if you can only look at a particular jurisdiction. So I think we see change. Maybe we don't see it at the pace that we expect to see it, and there is frustration, of course, in the societies. But I think if you compare today, 2024, with 2004, let's say, or to 1994, you're bound to see a big difference everywhere you look.
Mm-hmm. Now, leveraging your extensive experience in this field, what would you outline as the key determinants in underpinning a successful judicial reform? Again, sharing with us the Romanian example.
So I think it's the question of the hen and the egg, right? What comes first? Willingness to change from inside the system, or political determination to push for change and take upon yourself the change. I think Romania has proven that a combination works. And that combination has to come together at the moment when you have a window of opportunity opened. And judicial reform and anti-corruption are really some very difficult areas to open a discussion about. So you really need to have a serious incentive at the level of the state for that to happen. And for us, that was accession to the European Union. And I think for many of the Western Balkan countries, the mechanism is similar. The same for Moldova and Ukraine, because there's a lot at stake when you talk about high-level corruption, right? When you talk about high-level corruption, high-level officials would have a lot to lose if this happens properly and if these kind of efforts bear fruits. So obviously, you're going to have a lot of resistance, right? You're going to have a lot of resistance from very powerful people in the society. So you have to have the right context in which these things are happening. And for us, accession to the European Union was one of those moments. I think now with the geopolitical situation, with the aggression war of Russia in Ukraine, I think this becomes even more crucial for countries in our region, because it's, high-level corruption is not just a question of internal politics. It sometimes is a statal vulnerability to outside influence. And I think that is, today we see how serious this is. and how important it is to insulate somehow our processes and our statehood from external influences.
Mm-hmm. Now, can you share notable instances where your active involvement in anti-corruption initiatives or reform efforts has yielded tangible and noteworthy outcomes, and what pivotal factors contributed to their resounding success?
So I think anti-corruption work is not the product of one person, and definitely not the product of only my work. But I think we are all contributing to the big goal of fight against corruption and rule of law. And I start with giving you the example of the Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office in Romania, which started quite modestly in 2003, 2004, and then was reformed between 2005 and 2007, and then started proper investigations against high-level officials. And since then has continued to do proper investigations against high-level officials. We have thousands of people that have been convicted, hundreds that were acquitted, and I think that's also a sign of healthy judiciary when you don't have just convictions, but also acquittals. That shows judicial oversight. And we had top officials that went to jail for corruption offenses, right? This is not a little thing. I mean, for Romania, that meant a societal earthquake, really. And we had big clashes. We had politicians saying, why should it be like this in Romania when other countries are not doing similar things? Although politicians in other countries are maybe as corrupt as we are in some instances, right? And we kept on saying that it's each country on its own when it comes to choosing the policies it implements. And for Romania, that was an opportunity to cleanse a little bit the image of a corrupt country that was often attached to the name of my country. So I think these processes were very, very painful in terms of societal waves, let's say. And I think in a way, we also need to learn from this experience. We need to learn and maybe redefine success, because the superficial approach to this policy, this area of policy, is to say, well, if you have an efficient anti-corruption fight, you're going to have a prosperous society automatically, right? Because you get rid of corrupt elites, and then the society just grows naturally. Well, I think what we've seen in Romania is that anti-corruption fight, especially when it goes to the top, is disruptive, and it's going to create a little bit of a chaos in the society. So yes, there will be progress, but it won't happen immediately. And also anti-corruption generates noise and disruption in the society. So I think we need to learn that noise is good and silence is bad. And whenever we hear noises, I think that's a sign of a vibrant society, where not everybody agrees to the same thing, and where there is a healthy debate within the society. I'm personally afraid of countries where there's nothing, where there's silence. I think that's a big indicator of danger.
Mm-hmm. Now, from your perspective, what primary impediments or obstacles hinder progress in the Balkan region in this relentless fight against corruption, and what concrete measures can be undertaken to surmount these challenges?
Well, I think the number one challenge had to do with the stabilization of statehood in the Western Balkans, and then with the genuine political will to do something about corruption. And in a way, I think having Romania as a neighbor was both a source of inspiration and a source of worrisome thoughts for many politicians that have looked across the border and said, look, we may end up in jail. We may end up with our family businesses being scrutinized by law enforcement and prosecutors. Do we want that? Do we want our assets to be confiscated and maybe brought to the state budget? So I think the Romanian example was a good one, of course, in a sense, but at the same time, it was a sign of cautiousness. And I think I've heard, and I won't name politicians, but we can all find their press statements in the media, prominent politicians that said, do you want our country to be like Romania? Do you want to end up in jail? Because I think they realized, looking at the Romanian example, that once you unleash the judiciary, once you have independent prosecutors and independent judges, it is very hard to take that away. Yeah, and I wanna make a caveat here and say, I don't say that the Romanian example is a perfect one. Yes, so obviously there were maybe things that were not done perfectly, procedures that were not always completely followed, and we had acquittals for that. But I think in the big scheme of things, Romania proved that anti-corruption can actually happen to the top level, and that there can be accountability. And I keep on referring to my country because I think for us it was a very important step forward, because there was no time in Romanian history where we had political accountability. So it's not like we had a golden age to refer back to say in those good days when politicians were accountable. You know, we are somehow learning by doing the concept of rule of law, democracy, and also fight against high-level corruption. So in that sense, I think the window of opportunity is there for the Western Balkans right now. I think we also see, the threat in the East that can always become an issue also for us in our region. And I think, what maybe we're missing is more determination at the level of political will to go forward with this agenda.
Mm-hmm. Now, as a distinguished member of the expert group on corruption appointed by the European Commission, what were the most consequential recommendations that emerged from your rigorous research and analysis?
So I think you're referring to me being part of the group that was advising the European Commission on the anti-corruption report. Right. We need to remind our viewers that the European Commission has published an anti-corruption report on EU member states, which was really a very courageous, I think, and a commendable initiative. I think if I would have to pick just one area that to me was important, was to bring in focus the issue of public procurement. I think public procurement has been considered for many years as a technical area of policy, whereas we believe that public procurement is at the core of many corrupt schemes in the public sector, right? So public procurement is the main mechanism through which public money are being spent. And we thought that it is important to put a light, to focus on public procurement as a vulnerable area to corruption. And I think after the years have passed and the experiences of EU member states, the COVID experiences have shown how important this area of policy is, right? And how it is important to close the loopholes of conflicts of interest and corrupt behavior in relation to the appropriation of public money.
Now, moving very briefly to Ukraine, Ukraine has an observer status within RAI. Corruption is a major concern for Kiev. How do you fight corruption at a time of war?
I want to make a small rectification. It's not Ukraine that has the status of observer to RAI. It is the SBI, the State Bureau of Investigation, and the National Anti-Corruption Prevention Agency that have this status. So two agencies from Ukraine. I'm also currently involved in the selection of the next head of the preventive agency of Ukraine. And I was a member of the audit commission that looked at the performance of this agency. So I'm saying all this to give a background of my involvement in Ukraine and full disclosure. I have to say that I'm quite impressed by the fact that they haven't stopped, by the fact that although there is a war going on, they take anti-corruption very seriously. And I think if you talk with Ukrainian counterparts, many of them are voicing the same idea. And they're saying corruption, high-level corruption, is a threat to statehood. I think even, I think the war is even reinforcing the importance of tackling corruption and getting rid of people that are corrupt, because they are a vulnerability. They are even a security vulnerability in this context. And I think as painful as it is, the war is putting a focus on this phenomenon. And even people that were maybe skeptical of, what comes first, should we first work on other policies and then on anti-corruption? I think now they understand the importance of transparency and fight against corruption and prevention of corruption, not just fight against it. So I'm quite impressed, and I don't think it's an easy task, because of course you have priorities. But I look at these agencies in Ukraine and the fact that they're not stopping, and they have my admiration and respect.
Mm-hmm. And finally, Laura, looking ahead, what do you perceive as the top priorities in the realm of anti-corruption and judicial reform in the Balkans and in Eastern Europe?
If I'm to pick just a few areas of work in this very vast domain, I do believe in the value of transparency, and publication of declarations of assets and interests is definitely a step in the right direction, because it allows civil society, not just governmental offices, to do a thorough check of these declarations, as well as investigative journalists. But I think the big frustration with citizens of our countries is many times related to the work of prosecutors, who are not perceived to be as effective and as active as they should be, right? We have lots of investigative media that publish important investigations. We have civil society that is voicing concerns. In some countries, we even have state audit offices that are doing proper reports and submit them to the prosecutors or law enforcement. And yet there seems to be a limited follow-up. And there seems to be a very limited amount of cases that actually go before courts. And I'm talking about well-prepared cases, strong cases with proper evidence collected legally. So I think the number one area of reform that we need to focus on is the reform of the prosecution services in our countries. Maybe start with specialized task forces, and many of the countries in the region have specialized task forces or even departments or sections of prosecutors that are dealing sometimes with organized crime and separately with corruption. In other countries, they deal with corruption and organized crime under the same umbrella. And I think we need to see data, and we need to see performance data from these offices, right? So we talk a lot about the independence of the judiciary, and we speak about the independence of judges, but I think we need to devote at least the same amount of attention to the autonomy of prosecutors. Now, we need to be very careful about that, because you don't want to transform these bodies into super bodies that have superpowers that are not accountable to anyone. So incremental steps are the way moving forward, in my view, together with civilian oversight over these processes. And once we have that, or in parallel as we're building that, I think we need to focus on asset recovery. And we need to empower the offices that are existent in our countries and that do asset tracing and asset management to do even a better job in terms of searching for assets of corrupt officials, seizure of assets, identification of assets in foreign jurisdictions, and so on. Because I think otherwise, the degree of cynicism just grows in our society. If you just talk about anti-corruption but don't do anything about anti-corruption, people are going to become cynical, and they won't trust you anymore, irrespective of how well-intended you may be. I think we risk sometimes to dry of meaning this concept if we use it too often and without linking it to concrete results.
Right. Laura, it's a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much once again for your time.
Pleasure speaking to you too. Thank you.